We're back with Florida Senate President Don Gaetz and Florida Senate House Speaker Will Weatherford. Sorry about that, I didn't want to get you two mixed up, but you're working so closely together, and maybe that's why. Something has happened. There's been a huge investigation of internet cafes, and one particular organization that owns quite a number of them has been alleged to have committed fraud. And the Lieutenant Governor has resigned because of a firm she was connected with, having done some PR work for this firm. And that whole issue of what to do with internet cafes in terms of legislation wasn't clear where it was going during the session. And I guess Senator Gaetz, I'll start with you. Will this have an impact on legislation in terms of internet cafes in Florida?
I think it will. I think that the ill wind that came in with this criminal investigation and the resignation of the Lieutenant Governor may blow some good omens. And one good omen was articulated by the Speaker when he said that he wanted to take up legislation to get rid of internet cafes in the Senate. We will be taking up legislation to do that as well. I've long been opposed to internet cafes. I think they're predatory, and I was a co-sponsor of a bill last year that would have gotten rid of them. The bill passed the House, but it didn't pass the Senate. So the Senate needs to step up this year, and I think sometimes there can be an opportunity when the public's consciousness is raised about an issue to do the right thing, and this may be that time.
Is the House on the same track?
We're absolutely on the same track, and we did pass that bill last year, and I knew the Senate President was supportive of a ban on internet cafes long before it was in vogue as it is now. And very quickly after we had heard about what was taking place with this Allied Veterans Group, which runs a lot of the internet cafes, the Senate President and I, through our offices, had determined very quickly that this is a great opportunity to once and for all declare these things as illegal and ban them in the state of Florida. It's been a slow creep into our state, but it's been the largest expansion of gaming that our state has ever had.
It's amazing.
And you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent in these internet cafes and preying upon some of our weakest and sickest and oldest people in our state. And it's a shame that it's gotten as far as it had, but as the Senate President said, there's a silver lining to what was a sad day yesterday with the Lieutenant Governor, and that is we can once and for all define these internet cafes as illegal and ban them from our state.
Each of you have emphasized elections reform and ethics reform. Let's start with you, Mr. President. Ethics reform is on a fast track. I think a series of bills passed the first week. What is most important to you about ethics reform in terms of legislators and public officials?
Well, the most important thing is to lift the standard of public conduct in this state. As the Speaker has indicated, if we ask people to trust us about education policy or environmental policy or economic development policy, first they have to trust us, period. And that's at the local level and at the state level as well. So again, with bipartisan support, and you asked about Chris Smith, with his strong support and under the leadership of Senator Latvala, we unanimously passed what I consider to be a strong ethics bill and what some people have said is the strongest ethics bill in 38 years. We've sent it over to the House of Representatives, but this bill, while it was sent by the Senate to the House, is not a Senate product. It's the product of collegial work between Speaker Weatherford and myself and senators and representatives. And now the House of Representatives has it. They may well improve upon it and send it back to us or pass it the way it is. But the main thing is we've taken a big step forward, and I'm so grateful to Speaker Weatherford for being a full partner in this whole effort to raise the standard of public conduct.
Tell our viewers maybe the two most important provisions of that act.
Well, first, we just wrote off $800,000 in fines that were levied against politicians and public officials, and they didn't pay their fines. These were fines for violating ethics and elections laws. So we're giving the Ethics Commission in the Senate bill the teeth to extend the statute of limitations to 20 years for these fines and then garnish their public salaries and lien their private property if they don't pay it. So you can have all kinds of rules, but if you can't enforce them, you don't have much. The other thing is making sure that people who have a conflict of interest don't vote to inure to their personal gain or loss. We want to make sure that public office is a public trust and not an opportunity for private gain. There are a variety of aspects to the bill, but teeth in the bill and making sure people don't use their public office for private gain, that's the real essence of this legislation.
And Mr. Speaker, you have wanted to reform the contributions process, including possibly getting rid of CCEs, Committees of Continuous Existence, and changing the limits for contributions and so forth. Tell us where that is.
Well, let me first say, I think what the Senate President did by passing an ethics bill on the first day of session has set the tone for this session. And Mr. President, I think that bill is going to be transformational for this state. The House is excited about passing that bill and working with him on that legislation. But we also believe that you can't do true ethics reform without a component of campaign finance reform. We have the most complex, convoluted, wild, wild west campaign finance laws in America. And because of that, the caps that we've put on personal contributions, we have pushed most of the resources out into these third-party entities. And so when people see a mail piece that says, you know, Floridians for Freedom, but it's some slam piece, you know, saying some terrible things about somebody, we have pushed money into these entities that have no accountability. And for us, we think to build the trust back in the public, we've got to fix some of our flaws in our campaign finance laws. And these committees that are called CCEs have become slush funds. And we've got to eliminate them. There's no way to rehabilitate them. There's no way to make them better. We just need to ban them. And we need to protect people's First Amendment right to participate in the political process, but there's a much better way to do it than we're doing it right now. And I want to thank the Senate President for working with us on that, because we believe it's a strong component of doing ethics reform in Florida.
How is the prospect of banning CCEs being received in each chamber?
Well, let me just say that this is an example of where I think we're trying to work together and learn from each other. The original Senate proposal was, let's go after the abuses of the CCEs, the slush funds, the misuse, the living out of the CCEs. And the Speaker said, look, you can't mend it, you got to end it. And I think the Senate is going to come to the House position on that issue so that we'll be able to end member-controlled, senator-controlled CCEs, period. Okay. I think we'll come to the Speaker's position.
Interesting.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I think we just
you heard it here.
Saw something happen there.
Right.
News. All right, let's talk about the general elections reform issue. Again, we talked about it, I think, last time, long lines during the 2012 election, some national coverage of that, and I think there's pretty substantial elections reform legislation moving through both chambers. I'm not quite sure where it is. I'm sure you are. We'll start with you.
Well, it happened so fast in the House. While everybody was busy watching the Senate doing the people's work of passing ethics reform,
right,
we were on the floor of the House passing elections reform
the
very same day.
Okay.
And what that has done is it's put a bill to the Senate to look at and hopefully refine and make even better, but to solve the problems of our elections process. No one should ever have to wait in line for 6 hours to vote on early voting. Nobody should have to wait until the Friday or Saturday after an election to figure out who won. There's a way to do an elections process in the state that is timely and efficient and easily accessible by the public. And we think that's what our bill does. We're not married to it in the sense that we think there are always new ideas that could come to light. And so our chairman, Chairman Boyd, Jim Boyd, has done a great job on that bill. He's working with Senator Latvala on that issue. And the hope is that between now and the end of session, we have a transformational ethics reform bill that makes sure we don't have these problems ever again.
Okay, let me just run through a number of issues that people are interested in. Online sales tax. I know a lot of retail organizations and business organizations are saying you're putting us at a disadvantage if people can go on the internet, you know, order something and they don't pay the Florida sales tax on it. What is the traction of that idea that sales tax should be collected on online purchases?
I think the retail establishments that operate in Florida with bricks and mortar and operate on Main Street and support our Little League teams and our softball teams and our communities have a point. But I can't find anybody in the Florida Senate who ran on a platform that said, if you elect me, I promise to give you a tax increase. And in my part of Florida, Northwest Florida, if you didn't used to pay it and now you're being forced to pay it, they call that a tax increase. So what we've said in the Senate is, let's look at this issue in terms of balance. can we find a way to create not just revenue neutrality, in other words, a tax break to balance what would be the collection of additional taxes, but let's make sure that the people who would have to pay an internet sales tax would get the benefit of a tax reduction. You can't, corporations don't buy shirts on the internet. So the kind of tax reduction that you would balance with an internet sales tax collection would be tax reduction that would go to the very people who pay it. And we're looking at things, Senator Dietert is running a bill right now which looks at the communication services tax as a potential tax to lower, because we have a communication services tax in the state that's way too high. So we're looking at options. We think it's an issue that needs to be debated, and we think the retail folks have a point.
School safety. There have been all kinds of ideas, Mr. Speaker, ranging from arming teachers to replacing windows with bulletproof glass. Any idea taking or ideas taking shape in legislation that you would likely see pass?
Well, we're looking at all the options. I think, we talked earlier about the fact that sometimes tragedies happen and it creates a heightened sense of an issue or a problem that exists in our society. Unfortunately, we can't legislate against crazy. What took place in Newtown, Connecticut was a tragedy, it's one of those days that you'll remember where you were when you heard about it. But you can't legislate sometimes against crazy. Now, that doesn't mean that we should not do everything possible to try to make sure that our children are protected. And I think that we're doing that. And so we are doing an analysis of what can we do for our schools to try to make sure that they are safe. But what took place there, and what does sometimes take place in society, is there are some crazy people out there that do horrific things. And we can not always legislate against that. But it is a priority for us in the Florida House to continue to find ways to protect our children.
Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, it's been a pleasure. We look forward to seeing you in the near future.
Thanks a million, Steve.
Thank you very much.